Again, thank you so much for having us and welcoming us to Calvary. This is becoming one of our favorite traditions, is in the spring to come and be a part of this great series, to have teas and do all kinds of talks and be together. Last night we had our first major tea and justice party right next door and toasted all the women who are in the fields working with teas, and toasted the women who are new in Memphis into recovery at the Thistle house here in Memphis, and to the work that Eileen and so many folks at Calvary are doing to be friends of the social enterprise in Nashville, Tennessee called Thistle Farms, by harvesting honey and growing herbs and being a part of this movement that celebrates how women heal in community with the support and love of a non-judgmental community. At the end of that tea party last night, one of the residents of the Thistle house came up, Lacey, and said to me, "I know this is a big question, but what is love? I mean, unconditional love. What is it?" And so I have laid my prepared talk aside, and I would like to try to answer that question for you. I am convinced that no one can answer that in a speech, but we answer it truly in our lives. I know that none of us can answer it alone, but part of the reason you're here and part of the reason I am here is to uncover the truth of that question as best we can. What is unconditional love? How do we know it? How do we feel it? How does it move us in our lives? So we come together without judgment and honoring one another to get as close to an answer as we can find. For me, my first glimpse of it was with my mother. After my father, who was an Episcopal priest that moved south to start a church in Tennessee, was killed by a drunk driver when I was 5, and my mom was left a widow at the age of 35 years old with 5 children in the South. And they started the court to prosecute the truck driver that had killed my father. My mom went up before the trial started and said to the man, "I just want you to know that we will be fine." Her lawyers, furious, basically settled that same day out of court. And with that, my mother wondered for years and years if she had done the right thing. I believe she gave us the greatest inheritance we could have ever had. The idea that we did not have to carry around bitterness and resentment and hold on to things that were beyond our control or fairness. But she offered us a way out, a way of looking at someone and offering love. I am no more faithful than I was 20 years ago when I started Thistle Farms, 30 years ago when I started seminary, 40 years ago when I first understood what it means to be broken in this world. I'm just trying to live into my hope more now than my doubts. So what is unconditional love? First, I think it is the truth. Love is woven into the fabric of creation. It is in our DNA. We have stardust coursing through our veins. We have oceans for tears. And you and I have love deep within us. We are born with love. It's not a feeling that we have to search for. It's the truth of our lives, and it calls us to seek justice, to desire for mercy, to forgive all that we have done and left undone, and all that has been done and God knows left undone to so many of us. Our candle maker at Thistle Farms is named Ty. And Ty started making candles for us years ago. She had been in prison for years before that on 4 different counts of both prostitution and trafficking. She came and she spent a year learning about her past and learning about her triggers and her disease. Because Magdalene and Thistle Farms take no money from the federal or state government, this was all a gift back to the community as well as to Ty. She did great work. She learned how to make candles, and she was sharing the light with so many. There was one charge left pending, and we went and we testified on her behalf about what the great work she had done and about how she was healing and making restitution, and they sentenced her to 14 more years in prison. She went back and sat in prison for 3.5 years. As long as most people go to college, she sat there and sat out her sentence. When she came out, she came back to Thistle Farms the next week, stood behind the candle table, and began to make candles to share the light again. Ty, how did you do it? I said. How are you not so bitter and resentful and full of anger at this world? Where was the justice system when you were not even 12 years old, hiding in your closet in the afternoon from your stepfather? Where was it when you were hustling at 14 years old to find clothing? Where was it? When your addiction got so deep you didn't even know your name and there were no free recovery places to even think about as a choice. She said, I did it because I felt love. I felt the love of a community that didn't abandon me in my hardest times, who wrote to me those 3.5 years, who kept loving me until I could feel it, and I have nothing but gratitude. That's love. The disciples took 3 years to make their way to Jerusalem. Enough time, I believe, to live into the truth of love and to prepare their hearts to actually lay down their lives for the sake of it. The truth of how sweet and beautiful and powerful love is makes all the clanging bells in this world ring in harmony, in a graceful melody that reaches past our cynicism, past our fear and past our brokenness, and even past the sting of death, because it is the truth. Unconditional love is the root of faith. Dirt is universal, and it grounds everything that grows in this world. Jesus was all about roots and dirt. That's how you grow love. He wrote in it in the face of danger when a woman was accused of adultery. He uses dirt to make a healing mud when he is confronted by the pain of this world in a blind man. And he told the disciples, shake it off your feet if you go somewhere and you can't find peace. When Jesus teaches the disciples how to live in love, he focuses on the root of it all, dirt and seeds. In the midst of institutional poverty, violence, and oppression, then and now, all of us try to remember what it is that makes us loving. There is so much injustice, especially experienced by survivors of this universal issues of sexual violence, survivors who have seen the backside of anger, the underside of bridges, the short side of justice, and the inside of prison walls. But the truth of love calls us not just to rail against principalities, but for you and I to get to the root. Jesus tells stories over and over in the midst of that injustice about dirt and seeds, plucking seeds on the Sabbath, the sower and the seeds, about planting weeds among the wheat, and about that amazing mustard seed. To understand the root of love, powerful enough to carry us through this world. You and I and all of us in this beautiful season of Lent are invited to pull up old, dead weeds that we do not need. To carry out old stone rock. To cultivate good soil, to water and dig deep and make new furrows. To overturn the hard, dry ground. We are dirt. And we are reminded at the beginning of the season that all of us will return to dirt. That is the truth. But while we are alive, we can grow good things. We can make that dirt lovely and lavish so it can withstand storms and produce new life. And unconditional love is desire. Being in love is unfathomable. And sometimes I believe it feels unattainable. But isn't that our hope? On long nights when worry sits by our beds, and on gray days when we wonder, how is it that the clock keeps ticking seamlessly when this hour is dragging on? And on lonely roads, when we can't imagine that someone loves us, when longing overshadows community, we can trust that our desire for love never ceases. And that desire itself is hope. There is always the hope of love. After Jesus' death and resurrection, as his disciples were still praying, Lord, help my unbelief, as no one can fathom how love could conquer death, Paul gathers the community and says, in your desire to love, in each one of your desires to love, do three things. Be in fellowship, live in generosity, and break bread. That is how we have tried to live for the last 20 years in the communities of Thistle Farms and Magdalene. We have tried to witness to the truth as best we can that love is the most powerful force for change in the world. And so we strive to live in fellowship. We do our best to be generous, and we faithfully break bread. And in doing that day after day, year after year, somehow we have discovered love. And it is our greatest desire. All the lavish gifts we have been given, all the way that strangers have loved us and treated us, have reminded us that we are loved. And so in loving, we find that we are loved. We have seen its power, and it has changed us. The power of love in community is beyond measure. Together in love, you and I can do things we could never imagine alone. And it heals us all. Love is not a commodity one person bestows upon another, but a grace that fills us as we live in fellowship. So unconditional love is truth. It is the root of all faith, and it is our deepest desire. Beyond that, it is the inspiration, the key to freedom, the priceless pearl, the healing sacrament, the plowshare from swords, the measure of our worth, the eternal kiss on your temporal lips, the substance of dreams, the connection between two strangers. May we never stop asking what is love, and may that question never trip us up in trying to answer it. Several years ago, I was confronted by this question in my own life. One of the women that was wanting to come to Magdalene when I met her was in state custody, chained to a bed with a feeding tube. The brokenness of this world had landed on her 85-pound frame, and she was crushing underneath it. She was my fear of what it must look like when love is not strong enough. That if you are born into poverty, endure trauma, succumb to addictions and some maybe bad choices, that you die in this space where no one will claim your body. And so it was as a priest when she died a few days later that I feared her funeral like I had not feared funerals before. When the 5 of us gathered with her ashes in a cardboard box and said, you say the opening prayer, you read a scripture, you say something kind about her. I thought, maybe this is what it looks like when all the brokenness of this world overpowers us. Or maybe we are incompetent to deal with it. Maybe people can't change. Maybe it's just too much. So the 5 of us started in a pretty barren room with the words, "The Lord be with you." And no one could answer back, "and also with you." Love was so thick in that room, you could not speak through it. When there is nothing else, there is love. And if a chariot ever came down for a child of God, it came that day. We will not ever be abandoned. In the end, dear Lacey, in the end, dear children of God, love will have the last word on your life. And that is enough to assure us we will find our way home, and it will remind us that we were enough.